Boy, it's good to be here. I was telling, forgot who was telling, that I had to cancel, 3 weeks ago?
Yes, sir.
I woke up with a heart issue, so I can appreciate Chris's concern. And I had the message up here, but I didn't have the message on the PowerPoint. And so this reprieve has given me a chance to put together a little bit of something that might help us visualize the message. How's it been going? The parables of Jesus this past summer. There's a couple of the speakers here, so be careful how you answer that.
It's been amazing.
Good. Sitting at the feet of Jesus, Martha, Martha, you are concerned about so many things. And really one thing's important. Your sister has chosen the good part, to sit at the feet of Jesus. Well, that's what we're going to try to do tonight. Parables. I'm probably covering ground that has already been covered. Parable is something that has been thrown down beside. Beside, balo, to throw. It's been thrown down beside to illustrate. I want to try to tell you a concept that you might not grasp. So I'm going to show you an illustration of something you do grasp. And so Jesus spoke in parables, but Jesus was not the first of God's people to use parables, was he? In fact, I think you'll discover that most of the parables of Jesus are him explaining parables from the prophets. We're going to see that especially here tonight, that the parable of the tenant farmers, it's found in 3 places. It's Matthew and Mark and Luke all have the same story with their variations. But it's based upon a parable in Isaiah 5. And we're going to take a look at both of those here tonight and try to mesh them together. Now, somehow, what I want us to do, let's start with this. As you see up on the screen, the parable of the tenant farmers. We're going to use the Mark reference for our discussion. It's in chapter 12, Mark 12, 1 through 12. So let's just go ahead and read that here together. And he began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard and put a wall around it and dug a vat under the winepress and built a tower and rented it out to vine growers and went on a journey. And at the harvest time, he sent a slave to the vine growers in order to receive some of the produce of the vineyard from the vine growers. And they took him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Again he sent them another slave. They wounded him in the head and treated him shamefully. And he sent another. That one they killed. And so with many others, beating some and killing others. He had one more, a beloved son, whom he sent last to them, saying, "They will respect my son." But those vine growers said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." And they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. What will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. Have you not even read this scripture? The stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. This came about from the Lord, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And they were seeking to seize him, and yet they feared the multitude, for they understood that he had spoken the parable against them. And so they left him and went away. Interesting stuff. I found myself reading through there wanting to stop and make a comment. And I said, no, I'm reading the text. It's full of commentable stuff. And I hope I get this correct. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about God's vineyard here tonight and that he's looking for fruit. Now I want you to start with that thought, that God was looking for fruit from his vineyard. Okay? So watch some of the key details as they arose here in Mark 12. And I'm asking you to do this because when we look at Isaiah, you're going to see, wow, that's interesting. Okay. So first of all, there was a vineyard. Then there was a protective wall around the vineyard. There was a wine press and a vat in the vineyard. There was an expectation. Come on. There it goes. A tower. And we're having a delay here. There it goes. There was the expected produce there in verse 2. That's why he sent the servants so many times. There was an expected produce. Key in on that thought. God is looking for something from his vineyard. Okay? This is, there we go. I'm having he's getting me a new thing. The servants were mistreated. Okay? Forward. I'll give you that. Servants were mistreated. The continued abuse on the various servants, as we read. A son was sent to collect who was then murdered. And so in verse 9, Jesus says, Mark says, what is he going to do to those guys? So that's the parable. Those are some of the key details. Now, it's time now to read Isaiah 5. Okay? Isaiah chapter 5, the first 7 verses. Actually, the story goes on into the remaining chapter. We'll note that here in a minute, but I'm just going to read the first 7 verses. Let me sing now for my well-beloved a song of my beloved concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a fertile hill, and he dug it all around, removed its stones, and planted it with the choicest vine. And he built a tower in the middle of it, and hewed a wine vat in it. Then he expected to produce grapes, but it produced worthless ones. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why, when I expected it to produce grapes, did it produce worthless ones? So now, let me tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it will be consumed. I will break down its wall, and it will be trampled ground. And I will lay it waste. It will not be pruned or hoed, but briars and thorns will come up. I will also charge the clouds to rain no rain on it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his delightful plant. Thus he looked for justice, but behold bloodshed. For righteousness, but behold a cry of distress. Now let's analyze these details. Okay, Yahweh's vineyard. He had a vineyard, verse 1. A protective wall, verse 5, which he said he was going to tear down. A wine vat, verse 2. A tower, verse 2. And the expected good grapes, verse 2. Does that look like the parable we just looked at in Matthew 12 or Mark 12? I mean, I did put a protective wall out of order here in order to just keep the same order that we had in Mark. But it's identical. Okay? So Isaiah 5, the vineyard parable, was the source of Jesus' parable. He was explaining or using that to take type, antitype. What happened in Isaiah's day? Because it was worthless grapes rather than, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. We can do that on this chart here. Taking a deeper look, who is the vineyard owner? Well, verse 1, Isaiah says he's my well-beloved. But you notice in verses 3 and 4, there was a personal ownership. My beloved had a vineyard, and he dug it, and he did this, and he did that. So this is not Isaiah's vineyard. This is his beloved's vineyard. And then in verse 7, it's Yahweh of hosts, the Lord of hosts. It's his vineyard. It's his vineyard. Okay? And so he had expectations. The vineyard was the house of Israel, verse 7. It's his vineyard. It was the house of Israel. He expected, verse 2, verse 4, he expected good grapes. Verse 7, Justice and righteousness is what he... Did you notice that? The vineyard of the Lord of hosts is Israel, the house of Israel, the men of Judah, his delightful plant. Thus he looked for justice. Well, up here in verse 2, what did he look for? He expected grapes. He looked for justice. He expected grapes. He looked for justice. The fruit of the vineyard was not what you see in the picture there. I'm pointing to that one because that's the one I see. But was the hearts of the men of Israel and the women. I'm looking for justice and I'm looking for righteousness. That's what he was looking for. But the reality was he found worthless grapes. Why does it produce bloodshed and a cry of distress? Now, what should we expect? Therefore what? If you begin reading in verse 8 and go almost all the way to the end of the chapter, you'll find a series of woes. 8, 11, 18, 20, 21, 22. Woe, 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 woe. What does woe mean? Stop? No, that's woe. Translate woe into English. I always tell people to say, oh no. Oh no. I mean, it's just something terrible. It's not a pronunciation of destruction. It's, oh no. That's what's going to happen to you. You see a person step on a banana peel. What do you say? Oh no. Or a patch of ice. You see what I'm saying? And so because this is what they were, oh no. Bad things are about to happen to them. So, let's take a look at the next slide here. God's vineyard. I want to combine these two parables, Isaiah and Mark, and compare them. For example, in who is the man? The man planted a vineyard. Who is the man? Well, Isaiah says it was Yahweh of hosts, the Lord of hosts. That's the man who owns the vineyard. What was the vineyard? Isaiah 5:7. It's the house of Israel. Okay, and the produce, according to what the owner was looking for in Mark 12, the produce was justice and righteousness. Again, what God can develop in the hearts and minds of people. That's what he's looking for. And as you sit there and look at these slides, I want you to understand what God is still looking for is the quality of your heart, the attitudes of your heart. All right. So, we combined those guys. Now let's combine the outcomes. What was the outcome in Isaiah? We saw that he would remove the protection. We saw that he would lay it waste. We saw woe after woe that would come upon them as a consequence of them not producing for God the kind of heart that he was looking for. What about in under Jesus? Now we're going to pick up a couple other places like Matthew and Luke where this parable is also recorded. We're going to look at a couple of those. But the first one is in Mark 12, what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to I'm going to come and destroy the growers. Isn't that what it said? I'm going to come and destroy the vine growers and to give the vineyard to someone else. In Matthew 21, when Jesus answered that same question, he says, he will bring those wretches to a wretched end. So we're going to get rid of the vine growers who would murder the Son of God, bring them to a wretched end. Here, give the vineyard to others. That's Mark 12, verse 9. Give it to others. And then look at Mark 12, verse 12. And they were seeking to seize him, and they feared the multitude, for they understood that he had spoken the parable against them. This was a parable against the current, whoever the them was, that were growing the grapes for God. They understood. These who does it say? They were seeking to seize him. Who's the they? They were seeking to seize him. In verse 1, he began to speak to them a parable. And so you'd have to go back up into the previous context. Who was Jesus talking to? He was talking to the spiritual leaders, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He wasn't talking to the general populace, the disciples. He was talking to the leaders of Israel at this time. And they understood He spoke this against them. They were botching the job. God was expecting from the people under their control hearts that would reflect His glory. But He was getting worthless ones. He was getting bloodshed and murder and the cry of distress. That's what He was getting from them. And they understood it. And so Luke says they wanted to seize Him and do bad things to Him. All right. Now, let's talk about, why did I talk about the stone? I mean, because Jesus talked about a stone, didn't He? Look carefully back at Mark 12, verse 9, when He says, what will the owner of the vineyard do? He's made this, and He's drawn in Isaiah 5, and they would understand that material from Isaiah. They would understand it. And they knew that he was applying it to them. And He did apply it to them. Watch what He said. What will the owner of the vineyard do? What will God do to corrupt vineyard keepers? He will come and destroy the vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. Have you not even, verse 10, have you not even read? What's the connection? See, what's the connection to He will come and destroy those vine growers? Have you not even read? Well, it's the stone which the builders rejected became the chief cornerstone. Now, what did the vine growers do when God sent His Son in the parable? What did they do? They killed Him. Would you call that, is that possible to call that rejection? They rejected Jesus. Okay? And then Jesus said, have you not read about the stone which the builders rejected? There's a clear connection. And so we're bringing that in. The rejected stone was used by God anyway. We're going to look at Mark 12, where we just did. We're going to see that comes from Psalm 118. And we're going to see how Peter used it in Acts 4. So let's do that. Psalm 118. I'm going to invite you to turn over to the book of Psalms. This has one of those very famous passages in it that oftentimes is understood outside of its context. People, this is the day the Lord has made, let us rejoice and be glad in it, like tomorrow is really going to be a good day because that's the day the Lord has made. And I believe that God is with us and makes good things, but that's not what the psalmist was talking about. He's talking about something very specific. So let's take a look. I'm going to start reading in verse 15. The sound of joyful shouting and salvation is in the tents of the righteous. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. The right hand of the Lord is exalted. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. I shall not die, but live and tell the works of the Lord. The Lord has disciplined me severely, but He has not given me over to death. Open the gates of righteousness. I shall enter through them. I will give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord. The righteous will enter through it. I will give thanks to you because you have answered me and you have become my salvation. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief corner. This is the Lord's doing. It's marvelous in our eyes. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. What day did the Lord make? Well, let's just walk our way through this. In verse 21, there's salvation. In verse 22, there's this corner. Though it was rejected, it became God's corner anyway. It's a marvelous thing God did when He laid that cornerstone. And so let's rejoice in it. This is the day. What day? The day that God laid the cornerstone of His permanent temple. And you and I are stones in that temple. See? That day, when God accomplished that, even though for 1,500 years, His vine growers were producing worthless grapes, God says, I got a day that's going to be a day of salvation, and my people are going to enter in and rejoice. That day is worth rejoicing in. The stone which the builders rejected. Now, the rejected builders, Mark 12:12, he says, you rejected it. It was spoken against them. It wasn't spoken against the disciples standing around. It was spoken against the ones that were supposed to be producing in God's people good hearts. It was spoken against them. In Acts 4, verse 11, I want you to read it with me, because this is where Peter is putting on a defense. You know, he's healed the lame man, and they brought him up on charges. Why have you done this? And so Peter started, man, what an opening. Now, why have you done this? You mean if the good that we've done to this lame man? I'll tell you why we did that. And so Acts 4, he said in verse 10, let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ the Nazarene, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by this man stands here in good health. You want to know why we did this? It's because God did it through the Jesus you killed and him he raised. He, Jesus, is the stone which was rejected by the builders. Now that's Psalm 118. Except, Lois, I left a verse out. I left a word out there, didn't I? This is the stone which was rejected by you, the builders. He was very specific to say what Psalm 118 was talking about was the builders or the vine growers in the days of Jesus. By you, the builders. Okay? So, Israel's leaders. This parable was against Israel's leaders. And did you notice? They would be destroyed, and the vineyard would be transferred, okay, to someone who would bring forth the fruit in it. So let's go back and think about that. The house of Israel is God's vineyard. It was taken from them. It was given to others. Okay, in a minute, I take you over to Galatians 6. In fact, if you want, you can just kind of flip over there. In Galatians 6, Paul says, may it never be, 14, but may it never be that I should boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, through which the world has been crucified to me and I to the world. For neither is circumcision anything nor uncircumcision, but a new creation. And those who will walk by this rule, peace and mercy upon them, upon the Israel of God. Do you see what Paul just said there? Those who were following Jesus, who had embraced Jesus, who had been baptized into Jesus, were called what? The Israel of God. The house of Israel was taken from them, given to others, and we are the Israel of God. All right? Pause. If that's true, what's God looking for? The Israel of God was God's vineyard. God was looking for good grapes of justice and righteousness. He's looking for what's going on in your heart, isn't he? Amen. That's where we're going with this. Jesus said in John 15, I am the vine. We read in Isaiah 5 that the Lord's vineyard was planted with a choice vine. Jesus said, I'm that vine. I am the vine. And then he said, and you disciples, you're the branches. Now, what happens on the branch of a vine? That's where the fruit is. I'll tell you this from personal experience. The fruit comes on the branch that grew last year. It won't come on the branch that grew 2 years ago. Fresh, but the vine keeps putting on branches, and the branches keep putting on fruit. Okay? And so the disciples are the branches. But that raises the question that went the wrong way. What is the fruit? What is the fruit that God is looking? You know, it's oftentimes when we come to John 15, bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. Oops, I keep pushing this by mistake. There we go. What is the fruit? And we hear John 15, prove to be my disciples by how much fruit you bear. And we equate that almost always with what? How many people we've led to Christ. Now, is that good fruit? It absolutely is. But is that the only fruit God is looking for? In fact, it's probably not even the major fruit. People being led to Christ is going to be a result of the fruit that grows in your life. Can you buy into that? Okay. And so, In Galatians, Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit. In Isaiah, he said it's justice and righteousness, but in Galatians, it's the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace. And you can read that list. I can't, all I can see is a bunch of gray lines. I can't read that list back there. But you can read it. And you know what I'm talking about. Love, joy, peace. What's your life look like? Do you have peace in your life? I mean, I hear people complaining about the economic situation, complaining about inflation, complaining about, and keeping a focus on all these things. Now, should Christians be concerned and aware of what's going on in the world around them? Absolutely. There's no way you can be a light unless you shine light on what needs to change. And John the Baptist is kind of a good illustration of that, wasn't he? You might say he lost his head over being so righteous, but he was shining the light. Okay? Do you have peace? Are you agitated? Do you see whether or not God is really in control of the world we live in, or is it up to these politicians? Let me just say it that way. Yeah, up to these politicians. I have joy in my heart and peace and love and kindness. What is God growing in your heart? You see where I'm going with this? Jesus said, you guys, you're botching it. You're not producing the fruit my Father's looking for. Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians 2, that because the Jews were hostile to all men, forbidding us to preach the gospel, they even killed our Lord Jesus. Paul said, an end has come upon them. A wrath has come upon them unto an end. Wrath has come upon them unto an end. I'm going to put an end to these people. They're not producing the fruit that God is looking for. I'm going to give the vineyard out to somebody else. Who did he give it out to? I would say the apostles initially, but then anybody. If Jesus was the good shepherd, there are other. Are you a shepherd? See, a good shepherd. There are shepherds. There are teachers of the word. What is God looking for in the lives? Those Jewish leaders, they didn't accomplish what God wanted. The nation should have been a light to the world. Instead, they were hated by the world for their arrogance. Now, we have been entrusted with the gospel. We have been entrusted with the role of helping people produce the fruit of the Spirit in their lives. We have been entrusted with that. Jesus is the vine. He is the true vine. He is the true vine. And he bears good fruit. Do you believe that? That Jesus bears good fruit? Well, what is the good fruit that Jesus bears? Your life. Your life. That's what he's looking for. You get to participate with him in that. Now, Steve, I'm just so excited that you put together a series that talks about how Jesus taught the common people. I chose one because I didn't get to choose the one I wanted. But I chose one in not which he's talking to the people. He's talking to the corrupt leaders. But what a blessing it must have been to those around him to hear that these guys who are dominating our life, dominating our faith, not letting us be free in God, I'm going to take them out of the way and give you new ones. How encouraging must that have been? I want you to rejoice. Let us be glad and rejoice in it. Psalm 118. I want you to rejoice in the fact that you have the freedom to bear in your life the fruit that God is looking for. And I want you to commit your hearts to that very thing. And I want you to stand up and sing just how excited you are to be a child of God, a fruit bearer for God. Let's stand and sing.